All right, so welcome back to my series on beginning photography, and today we're going to take a look at how to focus your camera. Now, you would think that focusing your camera would be really easy. You press a button on the camera does its autofocus, and bam, just like that, you're set and ready to go. But what you're going to find out, especially for beginning students, is it is a very difficult process. I get a lot of students who finally get the exposure right, and now they have focused on infinity. And if you don't know what that means, it means basically that your camera has focused out as far as it could go, and most likely their subject in the foreground is totally out of focus. Today I'm going to show you two different ways to use your autofocus and a couple different ways in which the camera can autofocus. All right, so what we're looking at here is inside of the viewfinder. And just up front, look, all cameras' viewfinders inside are going to be configured a little bit differently. I picked a simple one that's easy for people to look at and understand. Some are going to have a whole lot more points than this, but for right now, this is going to make it simple and easy. Now, when your camera comes from you from the factory, it's going to be set up using what we call expanded autofocus. And what that means is that this whole area that we see here is going to be activated and focus on your subject. So as long as your subject is in this area, it's going to autofocus. Sometimes there are brackets out here and it's a really big area. And all you need to do is get your subject in that and you're set and ready to go. What we're looking at here is something called single point autofocus, meaning that the only active area is this little box. So whatever this box is on, it's going to focus. Now, the reason that's important is sometimes focus needs to be critical, meaning it needs to be on a very specific area. You can also do kind of like a mild expanded area where an area just like this is going to be activated, but it's not a single point and it's less than this whole area. You're going to have control over how much of the area is activated. Mainly what we're going to be taking a look at today is single point. However, I'm also going to talk about when using expanded is a good idea. Before we get into these autofocus methods, let's go ahead and take a look at a camera and find out exactly how you autofocus using your camera. We are looking at a Nikon camera, and all cameras are going to be very similar to this. Up here in the front, we have an on-off switch, and there's always going to be a button located up here. This button is your shutter control button. However, this button has a couple of different functions. Number one, when you press that button or tap it, it activates the camera. It wakes it up. Secondly, it turns on the meter. The next step it does, if you press that button halfway down, it's going to activate the autofocus in your camera, and your camera is going to go ahead and try to autofocus. If you press that button the full way down, it's going to take the picture. The good thing is there's a whole bunch of stuff on this button. The bad thing is sometimes having too many functions on one button causes issues. So what I'm going to show you today is how to disable autofocus up here on your shutter button and move it back here. So you can see right here, this has auto exposure lock and auto focus lock. So on a Nikon camera, this is going to become your autofocus button. What's cool about this is it's an independent button. If you press it, it's going to focus. If you do not press it, it's not going to focus. This button is called a rear focus button or a back focus button. You're going to be using this with your thumb most likely on your hand. Pointer finger is going to be here and your thumb is going to be here. How does that going to help us focus? Well, first, by isolating that as an independent button, it's going to allow us to focus whenever we press it in or let go of it. And it's going to let us to do a couple of different things. The first one of those methods that we're going to take a look at is something called focus and recompose. Let me bring up an image here and I'll show you what I mean by focus and recompose. So this is what our viewfinder would look like through our camera, and you can see our focus point is right here. So the idea of using a single point is it allows you to put it on the critical area of focus. Now, usually with animals and people, that needs to be an eye. And you can see right here, it's hitting them in the head. And that might work in this because it's very close in the same plane. That might work great, but sometimes you're shooting with such a shallow depth of field that getting the eye is important. Now, a lot of cameras coming out today are coming out with a feature called eye tracking autofocus, where they track the eyes of animals and people. This is showing you that this idea is really important to do. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to do something called, so what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to show you how to focus and recompose. So this is what it would look like when you're looking through your camera. So in this case, we want this spot on this eye. So what we're going to do to focus is we're going to take our camera. This is the composition that we want to achieve. However, since the point is here, what we're going to do is we're going to move this point in our camera over to here. We're going to focus. Once we're done focusing, we're going to let go of that button on the back, because remember, when you press your rear button in, it focuses, and when you let go of it, it will stop focusing. And then we're going to recompose, and now we're going to take that picture, because this is the composition we want, but the focus was over here. So once again, we are going to move our camera, put the point on the eye, focus, let go of that rear button, recompose, and then take the picture so it looks like this. Now, another option that we have is we can actually move the focus points. So you can see there's actually a focus point right here that would work perfect. So if we could move this focus point over to here, we wouldn't need to focus and recompose. So how do we move these focus points to one of these other boxes? All right, so we are looking at the back of a Canon camera now. And you can see right here, there's an autofocus on button. So this is our rear autofocus button. However, on a Canon, you can actually switch it and use this as your autofocus button. The reason a lot of people use this button over this button is because it's a lot easier to reach with your thumb. I actually use this button, not this button. But right up here, you can see this little symbol on a Canon camera. So what you can do is tap this button. This button is going to activate those autofocus points. And then you can use this button right here to move horizontally and this vertically. All right, so this is the back of a Canon camera. Now on a Canon camera, there's nothing to tap. We had those three little points. We had to hit that button. As long as you are in single point autofocus, this button moves it to the right. This button moves it to the left. This moves it up. This moves it down. So all you need to do is tap this button up, down, left, and it's going to allow you to move those points around your viewfinder. Now that we know how to move the autofocus, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this point and we're going to move it over to here and move it over to here. And then this area right here is going to light up. And now that this area is lit, not this area, it's going to allow us to press our autofocus button. It's going to focus right here on that eye, just how we have it. And we don't have to, in this case, focus and recompose. We just need to focus and take the picture, because in this case, we moved the autofocus point to exactly where we wanted it. We're taking a look at a picture here of a dog, and notice that the dog is in the center of the frame. So this is a good example of a photographer getting focus on a moving dog, which could be very difficult. However, the composition really isn't that great because we have the dog centered in the photograph. Usually you want to have something off center. There are occasions where centering your subject can work, but this is a good sign that someone doesn't know how to move or adjust the autofocus on their camera, because usually you don't want your subject in the center of the frame. So if you have a subject that's moving towards you, what do you need to do? Well, you need to move your autofocus point to a side. The reason is, if this dog was running to me and I tried to focus and recompose, By the time I focused and recomposed, the dog would probably be 10 feet closer to me and I would miss the shot. So in instances when your subject is moving, the focus and recompose aspect doesn't work so well. All right, so let's take a look at this image. This dog is fast. Look at all the dirt that's flying up. It's running towards us. There'd be no way to focus and recompose. We would have to move the focus over here, which is moving our camera, focus, and then recompose. By the time we did that, the dog would be probably out of the frame or nowhere near us. So in this case, when a subject is moving, you have to move these focus points to get them in a logical area to track the dog as it's moving. So the logical thing to do in this is to quickly move the focus point to either here or maybe over to here. Now look, in some cameras, you're going to have more options, that there might be a button up here, there might be a button down here. It really depends on your camera. What you want to do is try to move it to the closest point, and then you're going to put that point on your subject and try to track them and then take the picture. That's the only way that moving this single point autofocus is going to work. However, in this image, that expanded autofocus might be a good option, because since the only thing in this frame is really this dog, all we need to do is track that subject. The expanded auto point might pick up your subject. This is really good for bird photography where you're up in the sky. The only thing is the object. The problem with expanded autofocus is you don't really have control over where it's focusing on. And a lot of times it's the area of the subject in the foreground. It might focus down here on his paw. It might focus on his nose. It might focus on his body. We don't really know because the autofocus is covering this whole area. So the problem with expanded autofocus is it's most likely going to find your subject, but you don't always have control over exactly where the focus is. And this is something you need to weigh when you're taking photographs. Let's go ahead and take a look at a portrait here. So in a portrait, you have the option. Obviously, we're telling this subject to move here. The focus and recompose is going to work really well. Well, why is it going to work really well? Because we're not moving and our subject's not going to be moving. All we would need to do is to bring that focus point up here to this eye or this eye, place it there, focus, recompose so that our subject is asymmetrical on this third, and then take that image. Now we could move a point, but in this case, none of these points going to land right on our eye. No matter what we would do, whether if we move the focus point over to here or up to here, we're still going to have to move to focus a little bit. So in this case, it's not going to be that big of a deal. It's actually pretty quick once you get used to it to focus, recompose, and then take that photo. Well, hopefully you learned a little bit about using the single point autofocus system in your camera. And don't forget, using that rear or back button focus is a great thing. If you haven't been using a camera for a long time, it's not going to be a big deal to switch from using that front button to activate your autofocus to the rear button. Then make sure you take some time. Look, you're not going to be able to go out and do this efficiently and fast right away. It takes time and practice to both focus and recompose or move that focus point around your frame. Well, that's it for today's video. Don't forget to leave any comments or questions below. And if you're interested, don't forget we have a Facebook group. That Facebook group allows you to post images and videos and further explain the issues that you run into. Sometimes when I get YouTube comments, I am unsure what you're trying to say or what the exact issue is, and it's difficult for me to help you out.